Hey, welcome back to another episode of Live here on Keystroke Medium. I am Josh Hayes here with Chuck Manley. Scott Moon is mysteriously MIA at the moment, and hopefully he'll join us here later. But everybody that's with us here now on the live show, welcome.
Kung flu.
And you'll have to excuse Chuck and his laggy internet and iffy microphone. We're gonna bear and grin it through it tonight, because that's how we do here on the show. There was some discussion about who gets the Keystroke Medium golf clap of approval between Tom and Rick, but actually it was Ellen at 702 on Facebook that made the first comment, and not Tom or Rick. So Ellen, tonight you get the Keystroke Medium golf clap of approval for the first comment. And if you're just joining us now on the YouTubes or Facebook, please give us a like and subscribe. That's our goal today, or this year, is to make 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. So if you're watching and you haven't done that, go over to Facebook, or if you're on Facebook, just click that subscribe button and hit the bell, and you'll get notified of all the shows when they go live. So there you go. We're talking about story this season for the most part, and we did a couple weeks ago, we did a show on world building and building your story through the world building. And tonight we're going to be talking about taking any idea that you have and developing that in a story. I know we're all writers and we all have a crap ton of ideas that we're just carrying around, and they don't stop coming. And sometimes you wish that they would just stop, because you have way too many ideas to begin with, and you're like, I don't need any more great ideas, because every idea you have is greater than the last one you have. But I think we all know that a single idea is not enough to carry a book. Could be it could carry a short story, but definitely not novel length. And so that's what we wanted to talk about tonight, is how do we take those little ideas, those little tidbits or concepts that we have every day, and turn those into fully fleshed out stories. So that's what we're going to talk about a little later on in the show. But as always, we like to start out the show just talking a little bit about what we had going on this week. And this week, I made some really good progress on Valor 3, Enemy of Valor. Today I got about 2,500 words written on it. Ironed out some plot points that I had, and I think it's funny because a lot of people know me for my outlining, and this third book in the series I did very little outlining on, and it's starting to kick me in the butt a little bit. But I've been able to figure it out and push forward, and I made some good progress. I'm actually doing a little bit of discovery writing right now, because I have a concept of what I wanted to do for a couple of scenes, and it's kind of blossomed into a whole bunch of chapters that I didn't think I was going to need in the book. So it's kind of ironic that we're having this discussion today. And also I've had some fun working on a story that I thought I was going to write as a novel, but I'm kind of playing around with the idea of writing it as a screenplay, and kind of did some fun work on that the last couple of days. I just took a little break from Valor and kind of messed around with the idea a little bit, and it was really fun. I think everybody knows I like character. I think one of the really strong aspects of my writing is usually the dialogue, and just writing dialogue has been really, really fun. And I got the trial version of Final Draft 11, which is a script writing software. You can do it in Scrivener too, I found. I'm not exactly sure which one I'm going to go with yet, because they're both kind of ridiculously easy. But it's, instead of doing like a quote, what they said, then comma, quote, he said, and then whatever you're going to do to do the narrative, you just type a name and then what they said, and you can just tab through it, and you can hit the first letter of your character's name. That name auto populates. You hit enter, it goes to the right thing, and you just start writing it. It's ridiculously fast, and I'm almost wondering if it would be faster in the process of writing a novel to have my outline and then write a screenplay second outline where I do like basically narrative beats like you would during like expanding the outline and then doing a screenplay of what the characters are saying and then going back and translating that back into novel form. But I'm not sure. We're not there yet. I'm testing it out. We'll see. Yeah. It seems, in theory, it seems like it would work out because I could iron that all out and have the story.
You definitely have to account for the different mediums,
right? Yeah.
After the fact, because you're going to have a lot more internal insight from the viewer standpoint than you would in a movie,
right?
So, but yeah. I mean, if nothing else, the screenplay would definitely give you a dialogue outline.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I could see that helping a lot.
And Tyler Davis says Scrivener templates do the same thing. You're absolutely right. I've actually got it on my iPad as well. Final Draft. It was like $10, and they all do the same thing. I'm just trying to figure out which one I like working in better. Final Draft 11 and Scrivener both do the same thing, almost exactly. Final Draft is a little bit some things different, but we'll see. Rick asked, "Why do you want to do a screenplay?" I don't know. I've been watching a lot of Aaron Sorkin shows and movies, and if you can look past his politics, they aren't really deeply seated in the shows and movies he produces, but you could kind of see that it's there. If you can skip past all of that, I think his dialogue is by far some of the best dialogue I've ever listened to. It's almost got like a musical quality to it, and so I've been watching a lot of his shows and then watching a lot of his interviews on YouTube. I'm also taking his masterclass.
Yeah, the masterclass isn't bad.
Did you take his masterclass?
I think I did roughly half of it, and it's still in my masterclass queue. But then Baldacci did one, and I got distracted by other.
I got to finish the Baldacci one because that one started off spectacular.
Yeah, he's pretty good.
What about you, brother? What have you been up to this week, man?
Well, I got a new computer, which is why my camera's working.
Did you get a whole new rig?
I got a whole new rig.
Nice.
One of the reasons it took so long is I was kind of vacillating between building one and buying one, and I finally decided that I like warranties, and I don't trust myself that much. So my son was really happy because I got a new one and he got my old one, and I did the whole, I wiped everything off of it and did a clean install of Windows for him and all that. So. Nice. It's running pretty good for him so far. He's got a couple of his games he likes on there, but making progress on the first Jack Dark book. Just doing things with the kids. I had 4 softball games yesterday. Yeah, so
my wife just sent me
keeping me busy
for T-ball. Are we going to do spring or summer T-ball this year?
Oh, thus it begins.
So I'm kind of waffling between the two because spring, I'm like, it's not going to be 104 degrees out.
Right.
But in the summertime, if it goes up above a certain degree, they'll like cut the game short. And so like the T-ball games are ridiculous. It's an hour, but it's half an hour practice, half an hour games. Right.
Right.
But in
pure comedy too, though.
Oh yeah. It's ridiculous. All the kids just run after the ball at the same time. They're all standing on the base and then they all converge on the ball. But in the summertime, if it's too hot, the games are only 15 minutes. And so we get done.
They don't do that down here. They made us play the whole flipping things out in the nice, humid Alabama sunshine.
That's no fun.
No, it's not. I'm not a summer person. And Scott's got the Kung flu, huh?
He's got the Kung flu, man. He was mentioning this earlier. And I thought he was going to be able to make it, but what probably happened is that he fell out and now he's sleeping.
Yeah,
which happened.
Let him sleep, man.
Oh yeah.
So concept to story, is that what we're doing?
Concept to story. I got this idea for 2 reasons. One, I've been developing the story for that I'm writing on the screenplay.
Sorry.
What's up, Hank? And two, it got me thinking about how I wrote Edge of Valor, how I come up with that novel, and the finished novel is way different, or way more complex than the original idea that I had that started the writing process. And since we're talking about story, makes sense to talk about how those stories begin and then how they grow. So I know I have a couple examples. Do you have anything that you want to throw out there right as we're starting the conversation?
Well, I think the first thing that pops to mind for me is when I was, a million years younger, one of the first stabs I took in a novel, I got an idea, I got a concept, and it, and to be clear, let's define that. A concept is like the idea. A concept would be a middle-aged man wakes up from a coma with superpowers.
Mm-hmm.
That's a concept.
Right.
Okay. That's it. And I had it in my head that I had this little concept, and that's all I needed to go off to the races and start writing. Did not go well.
Uh-huh.
That concept is really just the foundation that you build on. Because for me, before I'm ready to start writing, I need to know who that middle-aged guy is. I need to know who his family is. I need to know what he does for a living. I need to know what the problem is going to be related to the fact that he wakes up from a coma with whatever.
Right.
So you kind of have to take that concept and bloom it out into an outline, if you're a big outliner like you are, before you really start putting hands to keyboard, in my opinion. Because I tried to just say, okay, this is going to happen, and I start writing, and it didn't go well. Yeah, it petered out pretty fast.
I found that when Scott and I first,
make sure you don't think that's all you need.
Right. When Scott and I first started talking about books seriously back in probably 2012, 2011-ish, I had an idea to write a science fiction story about a crash landed spaceship on a planet that had dinosaurs. And that was the whole concept that I had. And I had a little bit of a thought of where the dinosaurs came from and what happened, what made the ship crash, and a couple other things. But I got about 55,000 words into that book and had absolutely no idea where I was going to take it.
Right.
And because I didn't realize that I had a concept, not a story. Right. And when I got to that 55,000 words, I stalled out. I got frustrated. I stopped writing and just put it aside because I had no idea where I was going. And fortunately, I've still been able to kind of pull concepts from that story in other pieces that I've been working on. But I realized then that I really needed to think about a story and not just the concept. And so like with Edge of Valor, the concept that I had was what happens when a shuttle full of combat Marines is shot down in enemy territory on another planet. What do they do?
Right.
And that was my idea. That was my concept. And so as I was planning that out over the years that I planned it out, it developed into a conspiracy. I knew I wanted to have a conspiracy. I knew I wanted to have some unreliable narrators in it, but I didn't know to what extent how I was going to do it, and what the actual conspiracy was. Like, I knew I wanted to have one, but I needed to come up with one, basically.
Right.
And coming up with the conspiracy and then coming up with all of that stuff in the process of doing that, I thought of subplots. I thought of what characters am I going to need for this, and that's when the story really kind of came together. And hell, even up into the last 20% of writing the book, I didn't know how I was going to pull it off. And then one day I realized the technology that I'd been using all along kind of made it all work. And that's how I was able to pull the end of the book. And for instance, and this is not really a spoiler, the book's been out for a while, but the computer equipment that they use in the story, it's called a link, and everybody has one. And it's Fisher uses it through the entire story to record interviews. And I was trying to figure out at the end, how do we disprove what everybody has said already? Like, we all know what the lie is. We all know what they're lying about. How do we disprove it 100%? Because it's not going to matter if we can't 100% disprove what they're saying. And then I thought about the recorder that Fisher has been using the whole time. And I thought, well, the other characters can record. And if there's a survivor, which I knew there was going to be a survivor, he can just record some of it. And so it all worked out. And it was a really simple thing.
I really believe that when you're really into a book, you are actually working on it also on a subconscious level.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because like, it could be on some deeper level that was your intention the entire time. You were so focused on the main plot that's kind of up in your face that your subconscious was sort of working out that other stuff that you would need to know later. That's a theory. I don't know. It sounds kind of woo-woo, but I mean, it's happened so many times that I can't help but think that there's something to it.
No, I completely agree. There are times, even in this Third Valor book, where the other day I just had that's how they're going to do that, or this is why they're going to do that. And actually, some of the things that I've had, those you call them epiphanies or whatever you call them, the light bulb moments. I thought, gosh, that could just encompass the entire third book. And then I haven't even touched the third act of the book yet. and so now I'm like thinking, how much is this going to inflate the book word count wise? Because I've now come up with a secondary plot that I need to explain the other stuff that I did in the beginning of the book. But as I'm getting deeper into it, I'm realizing I can't just do it in one chapter. It's got to like go over a number of chapters. And where they're at right now is kind of in the midpoint where you're worried about being boring, and it's ramping up even more. But as I'm going through that, I'm like, God, I don't know if I can wrap this up in 2 or 3 chapters. This might take 5, 6, 7 chapters, and then balloons into the thing. So, but that's what's great about outlining, is I can change them. And one of the things about why I outline the way I do is, so like you're saying earlier, you flesh out the story as you're building the outline, but then you can also see things. And again, this is just for me. I see things while doing the outline that I wouldn't see just doing a straight read through. Like or a straight write through rather. If I just sit down and start writing, I get to the point I'm stuck. Then I don't know where to go from there. Sometimes I've got it in my head that I'm going from A to B, but when I get almost to B, I find out it doesn't work and I don't know why. And I've got to rework a whole bunch of stuff. And that's why I try to do everything when I'm outlining, just to build that story out.
Yeah. I always have like a section of the book outline, not outline necessarily, but I always try to have a little bit done ahead of where I am in the writing, just so that I know where I'm going.
Yeah.
But I don't try to outline the entire thing, and that gives me that flexibility of, okay, I know I'm going to end when I get to the final point in this portion of the outline. I know I'm going to be here, but I did this thing back in chapter 2, so I need to adjust what happens going forward to reflect that. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
Kind
Absolutely.
of outlined in chunks.
Yep.
And I found that kind of helps with not writing myself into a corner, as it were.
Hank Garner says he likes to take the concept that Chuck mentioned and write a chapter. The sole purpose is to let me ask all those questions that I will ask throughout the book, and then I start over.
Yeah,
I think that's a good way to do it too. Rick says, I didn't realize who the main villain was until I was halfway through the last book. That's awesome. Nice work, Rick. Nice work. Welcome, Scott McGlasson's in the chat. And Corvo showed up, and we might have to kick Corvo out for this. Stephen King it away. Just figure things out as you go along. I don't think that's what we do here.
Worked out pretty damn well for him.
It has. It has. It's interesting because King takes the whole journey before destination like almost literally, because you can read Stephen King's books and you're wrapped into the characters, and he says JK, and then he goes big JK. Yeah,
but I think that's one of the reasons he's criticized so harshly for his endings.
Yeah,
because he does disregard the destination to the point that his a lot of his stories just kind of fade away. They don't really have a okay, it's over kind of moment. So
Jay Oliveira says clicked on the wrong one. I'm using the Save the Cat writes a novel book to outline, gets my ideas mapped out. I've heard of that book.
Yeah, I listened to the audiobook Save the Cat for screenplays, and I imagine it's very, very similar. And if you're a steady outliner, it's a great way. It's a good system. It's a good system.
Really? Do you remember anything of the book that you can talk about?
Well, I mean, in the screenplay book, it was mostly, you have, oh, geez, I can't remember now. What you have, like the 8 moments, the inciting incident, and you kind of just go around the clock face. And it basically, you just fill in the spaces between those, so you figure out what all those are, and then you just kind of.
Interesting.
If that makes sense.
I've heard of that book before, but I've never read it. I might have to check it out.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the one I'm thinking about. I've read so many, it's hard to keep up.
I know. I just bought a screenplay book. What's funny is over the last weekend, I listened to a lot of YouTube videos and podcasts on writing, and this weekend I was listening to a lot of Aaron Sorkin interviews and a lot of how to write a screenplay, like a lot of the top 14 mistakes screenwriters make, or the best 18 tips you can put in your screenplay or whatever. What was interesting to me is that almost 100% of the time, every tip that they said about writing a screenplay could be used in a novel, like exactly Absolutely. The same.
It's still storytelling.
Absolutely, it's still telling a story, just functionally and structurally. You're doing it two separate ways, different. Right?
One thing that always comes out for me whenever I entertain the idea, I've never written a screenplay. I wrote a couple of 10-minute plays in college, but I never sat down and said, okay, I'm going to write a movie script. But the one thing that whenever I start looking into it that really stands out to me is it seems like the structure is a lot more rigid for screenplays. Like, within the first 30%, this is supposed to happen.
Right.
And within the net 50%, this is supposed to have happened. And if you deviate outside of that, a lot of times, from what I understand, people don't want you to do that and buy your screenplay.
Yeah.
I mean, it just seems like I think you have a little more creative freedom with novels.
Yep.
Probably because there's not as much money riding on them if you write some big blockbuster movie.
Well, and it's, you're looking at a novel, you're it's one person, and well, with the exception of your editor, sitting down and coming up with all this stuff. And for us specifically, we write, spec fiction. And so you're talking about, things that don't exist. You're talking about far future things. You're talking a whole bunch of, so you get, like you said, a lot more freedom in that. Whereas typically a lot of screenplays, I think most overwhelmingly screenplays are usually not sci-fi fantasy.
Not quite so speculative. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of times, you're writing a screenplay to be made into a TV show / movie, and those things have budgets.
Right.
So, you start writing in spaceships and special effects and stuff like that, and people are going to turn their nose up at it because they don't have the budget for
we don't like this stuff. Lou Holston says, check out the Script Notes podcast. If you're into screenwriting, the hosts actually write screenplays that are produced. That's pretty cool. I'll have to look that up.
That's a good one. I want to write that down.
Script Notes podcast. One of the things I was thinking about when I was going over notes for the show and thinking of concepts from ideas, and this will be a spoiler for a book that's not out yet or a screenplay that's not done. So if you don't want to hear anything about it, then I guess don't listen to this. But the idea that I had for this screenplay or book story is about a serial killer that doesn't know he's a serial killer. That he, at some point during the story, he's involved in an auto accident. He has a TBI and gets acute short-term memory loss, or whatever the thing is that makes you lose your memory. I can't remember what it's called. But so he basically forgets, and he doesn't know who he is, doesn't know anything about himself, nothing. He has no identification on him. Nobody knows who he is. And there's another detective that's been kind of investigating these serial killings, but nobody believes that they're serial killings. They all believe that they're separate and not related. And throughout the book, she kind of has some interactions with this guy because of the accident, and is interacting with him as the victim of that accident the entire time, not knowing that he's responsible for all this stuff. And at the end of the story, she finds him as he's getting home, and he's realizing that he's done all this stuff at the same time. That was my concept. That's that whole thing. But that won't sustain a...
Well, can I stop you right there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I think the concept was, what if a serial killer didn't know he was a serial killer?
Yes. Yes, you're absolutely right.
And then you started fleshing out the rest of it to get yourself ready to write the story.
Right.
I think
you're absolutely right.
There needs to be a hard distinction there because folks who are just new to this need to understand that you need more than just serial killer who doesn't know he's a serial killer, because then you'll start writing and you'll just have no clue how to populate the world or where to go, unless you're Stephen King, and then you just...
Well, I think too, a lot of the story building, fleshing out, is something that you don't think about, I think, when you're first starting. And I know I didn't. No Memory of Valor. Yes, Jay, No Memory of Valor. You're absolutely right. Yeah, that's very good. There it is. No Memory of Valor. If you're new to the show, it's a callback that everybody comes up with names from my Valor series because Rick Partlow ruined the name for my last Valor book. Thank you, Rick. I appreciate that. But what I was going to say was that that concept in and of itself would not sustain a story. You have to add things into it. And I think some of the pitfalls that a lot of newer writers, and even me, sometimes fall into, is that we come up with that concept, we come up with that idea, and we're like, yes, that's a really good idea, I want to read about it. And then they get to the middle part, and they fight about, why is this the murky middle, we've called it before, or why is it getting boring here? And the reason is they're not adding additional conflict into their story that doesn't have to do, or that builds on the tension for the main concept. So as I'm coming up with these conflict points, and one of the things that Aaron Sorkin says in all of his scenes. I
I'm
can't even
sorry.
do this right now. Script of Valor,
I know you're
Mimosas of
trying to
Valor,
stop.
Sex in the
I
City.
saw that. Couldn't stop myself. I'm sorry.
Tom, you're on the list. I can't
That's pretty
deal
good.
with it. This is good.
By Josh Hayes.
Ridiculous.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. It's fine. It's fine. I like it. Jay Oliveira said Script of Valor. Maybe that's what I'll call it.
That's a good one.
No, so Aaron Sorkin has this thing, intention and obstacle, and every character has an intention, and there always has to be an obstacle to that intention, no matter what it is, and that creates the conflict and that creates the drama. And so adding that into the story, for instance, this detective, she works in a small town, and her department doesn't have the resources to investigate how she wants to investigate. So she's got to go outside the department. That causes conflicts. It's a small town, so you have small town politics that are involved. So she has some things that happen during the investigation where they're like, you can't do that because that's so-and-so's kid, and we're not going to mess with that. And so they shut her down from the police department, and she gets shut down from other departments. And so she has all this other conflict that she has to deal with that is not, how do we find this serial killer? And so all of that kind of works against her and builds the conflict and then builds the story out from that original concept. And that is what is giving me the length to go and say, okay, this is a full-on story now, because I can have this happen, and I have this happen, and I have this happen, and everything is a consecutive movement to the final destination, but it's always adding additional conflict and meat into the story without being boring. If your characters are always coming up against problems, but then easily defeating them, that is what happens with the middle. That's why people get bored. And I think a lot of that comes from not really fully developing the story. You're just trying to get to the idea that was your concept. You're trying to get there. You want to get there as fast as you can. And so you make it easy for your characters to get to the cool parts. And that is what brings down the middle of your story and kind of inhibits it in a way. And that's why I think focusing on building story from concept, because the cool thing about concepts is they're simple, they're easy to track. Like I've got a whole notebook of ideas and concepts. I've got an app on my Apple Notes thing is filled with tons and tons and tons of ideas that I write down.
Well, I mean, think about it. A concept is really nothing more than a writing prompt.
Absolutely, 100%.
You know,
and the cool thing about that is you come up with these concepts and you write them down and you save them. Sometimes they come back and help you in a project that you're working that you didn't realize. Like you thought of a concept and you're like, that'd be a really good story idea. But then you get to a point in your story where you're like, oh, that concept actually helps me out in the story that I'm dealing with right now. And I can weave that concept into the story as an additional conflict point or additional plot point. And it's weaving those concepts together in a way that makes your story.
Yeah. And going back to what you were saying about the murky middle and everything, you know, small conflicts like you're talking about, subplots, figuring out with those, and they don't have to be like big. They can be simple. They could be as simple as her boyfriend's pissed off because she's working so much kind of thing. You know, those things are the paddle that's going to get you through the murky middle. And they're also great for developing the character, like you know, like the if her boyfriend's pissed at her because she's working so much kind of thing. Well, you're going to learn a lot about both those characters over how they deal with that. You know, so that kind of real life stuff in the middle of whatever the weirdness of the main plot is going to make that character, give her more depth and make her more relatable to the reader. You know, so that is something that I think a lot of folks who are new to this tend to overlook. Are those small conflicts and those subplots. And I think that it's super important to have a couple of those in mind as you're going into the book.
I think one of the topics that people wanted to talk about when we asked a couple of weeks ago was specifically subplots and how to come up with subplots and make them relevant to the story. And I think really when you boil it down is I think that there are two types of subplots. there's subplots that will introduce like new concepts to the character, like a love life or a love story and a mystery. It could be two subplots, and it might not have anything to do with the main story. It's just something else that they're dealing with. So it kind of runs
Right.
parallel to the main story, and it doesn't really kind of affect the main story, but it's there building character. But then there are also subplots that are kind of like side quests, if you want to call them side quests, where you need something to push forward what you're doing. It's a roadblock into your main objective, and so you've got to kind of carry this out before you can go back and continue the main plot. And I think those are subplots too. They're just conflict points where you can create these different things to push your character further and not give them that easy button of we're just going to go to the figure out who the killer is.
One of the best examples that always pops in my head of something like that is I believe it was The Hobbit, when the band of dwarves and Bilbo and all those guys, they get captured by the elves on their way to the Misty Mountain.
Yep.
Right. Is that the way it went? Yeah. That was kind of a whole side thing.
Yep.
That was just there to sort of, and you learned a lot about those characters through that whole interaction with the elves and all that stuff, but it in no way was relevant to them getting from the Shire to the mountain.
Right. It got them Legolas, right? Like it added Legolas to their party, and then they continued on. Yeah. I like Tom says, when I get to the middle, I got murky in the when my middle got murky in the last one, I simply vaporized half of the supporting cast.
You always got to have some red shirts to do away with.
That's right. Kayleen Williams says, for some, I call them quiet moments, not exactly action packed, but necessary action. You have to sit down and I like playing cards in mine. I like developing. I've done it twice. I'm going to probably can't do it for very much after that, but I like playing card games, specifically poker, because you can write card games in such a way that you can develop character really, really well through card games. And I've had one who was a card shark, one who was really cocky with his cards, but he's not very good. And you can kind of draw that out of people during that kind of an event. It's probably not good to do it in every single one of my stories, but I like it. So
no, but any kind of contextual interaction, is really great for showing like a character's true nature.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it could be cards, chess, debate, Family Feud, what the hell ever. Anytime you have two characters butting heads, that's always going to be good stuff.
Jay said
something.
Jay Oliveira says, I was listening to Brandon Sanderson. He was saying that only one great idea won't make a great book. You need a mashup of 3 or 4 good ideas, then you could start plotting out a good novel. I completely agree with this.
Yeah, I like that.
It's one of the things that I looked at when I was putting together the Valor series, and then also now when I'm kind of working on this detective police thriller. 100%, I think that you can. One of his things, one of the reasons he says this is that you can start the book with a great idea. You have one great idea, and you start the book with the great idea, but that great idea is not enough to carry the book, and by the time they get to the end of the book, you're just kind of bored with it, and it is what it is. But if you can, or I'm sorry, I misspoke. He has 3 great ideas, and instead of putting all 3 great ideas in the first book, he spreads them out through 3 books. He says this is what most authors do. You have 3 great ideas, you make a trilogy, 1 great idea in book 1, 1 great idea in book 2, 1 great idea in book 3. But his theory is that it might not be enough to get you to book 2, because it's only 1 great idea, and it doesn't make the whole book awesome. It just makes it it's okay, but they're not
Yeah.
going to go read book 2. So if you take all 3 of those and smash them into one book, and it's so good that people are like, I want to go read book 2. Because the funny thing about Sanderson was the first book I read of his was Mistborn, and I didn't read it for a really long time because I didn't want to read a heist novel, and that's how he always describes it. But when I didn't want to read book 2, not because book 1 wasn't good, because book 1 was phenomenal, and it's probably, his books are, everybody knows, whatever, they're the greatest books of all time. I'm just gonna say it. But it was just because
Makes me feel like I should read one of them.
Damn it, Chuck! Read a Sanderson book. Read The Final Empire. Like, just go do it. I didn't want to read the second book because I didn't believe that the second book could be as good as the first book, because the first book was just so good. I didn't want to read the second one and get let down. Now, for Brandon's for Brandon Sanderson's, I just, the second book was great and the third book was even greater. So, and he does it with every book, which I don't know how he does it. It's crazy. But you take those ideas and you take 3 good ideas and you make a phenomenal book, and that's what's going to push people to your other books. Let's see. He says Jay Oliveris is talking about the Jim Butcher now, and this is about the if I'm
the Codex
Alera,
Alera,
right? Yeah. So Jay Oliveira says the Jay Butcher asked the guy for 2 bad ideas, and he was going to write a book with them. The guy said Pokemon, and it was actually the Roman Legion.
The Roman Legion.
That the guy said that Butcher needed to put together, and he did. And he wrote the Codex.
He did. He got some decent novels out of them,
and he got some really good books out of the deal. And it you know, and that it's how you know. It's how you pull it off. It's how you present the story.
Mm-hmm.
But again, he took a couple bad ideas, turned them into a good book. So you can do it with bad ideas and good ideas. Rick says Brandon Sanderson's books are much larger, though. If I were writing a 200,000 word novel, I might need 3 or 4 great ideas.
Well, now that's a valid point.
Yeah,
that's a very valid point. I mean, if you're writing epic fantasy, you're going to need more fodder for the mill, as it were.
Right.
I mean, because you're trying to, epic fantasy readers expect those big doorstop type books, so you're going to need more plot lines and ideas to fill that out. So that's actually a very valid point.
It's a valid point. The other thing I'll kind of point out too, with as you're looking at overall story, and the purpose of the story is to keep people reading, right? You want a good story to keep people reading. So if you look at TV series and specifically like mysteries that you're watching to find answers to, we talked about True Detective before. I'm watching The Newsroom right now, which is an Aaron Sorkin. It's very good. It's extremely good.
Never saw it.
Aaron Sorkin created it. He wrote the majority of the episodes, I think. Very, very well written. If you can look past kind of the loosely veiled politicism of it, it's the dialogue is fantastic. The characters are great. They're all ridiculously smart characters, well written. But there's every episode has got a different idea, and usually a couple ideas, and usually there's one bigger idea that kind of pulls them all together. And you get to the end of the episode and you get a little bit of answers on what you were looking for, but then you have some more questions that you need to deal with, and not necessarily cliffhangers, but they're things that you want to continue watching for because you're so drawn into it.
Right.
And I think that's kind of too where you look at overall story, and you start with a concept and you have to come up with these story characteristics throughout that create conflict that push the reader through while still kind of carrying on the bigger story arc. And
always leave a couple of those questions unanswered so they'll come back for the next episode.
Yeah.
Because once you answer all the questions, it's over.
Exactly. 100%. Rick said something about Justified. He thought the dialogue in Justified.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Justified.
He wanted to know if you ever watched it.
I have watched it. I'm trying to think if I've watched the last season or not.
I haven't. I've watched every season but the last one.
I know that I've watched the first season a couple times. Gosh, I have to look on my Amazon because I don't know that I've watched the last episode. Not because it
Yeah.
wasn't good, just because I had other stuff going on. But I did
God,
like.
there's so much out there now.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah, I don't know that there's any way you could ever watch all the shows that you wanted to watch. I just try to, like, for instance, I'm studying dialogue now, so I'm watching shows that are written by people that I know are really good at writing dialogue. Like, and even True Detective, and the guy that wrote True Detective, gosh, I can't remember his name now, but his dialogue and his structure was very good.
Hmm.
We talked about The Wire before. Tom's bringing that up. Gosh, there's just so many shows that the dialogue is so good, and I get stuck on talking about dialogue. But when we're talking about story, I think that you look at those conflict points, and a lot of people think of them as, like they do the scene sequel deal, where you have one scene that kind of leads up to a little cliffhanger, and then you solve the cliffhanger in the next uh in the sequel to that scene, and
Right.
you keep kind of building it on that, and pushing it forward. And and that's some of the things that I do when I come up with the conflict points or subplots in my story is, how much can I mess with my character, and like, just how hard can I make her job? Like, how hard can I make
Right.
it for her to do her work from an external level and an internal level? The interesting thing about shows like True Detective and The Wire is that you're dealing with police, you're dealing with violent criminals for the most part, but you're also dealing with, you have pressure coming from three different directions, and they're all legitimate hiccups and roadblocks to the story. So you have the criminal that you're trying to catch, and he doesn't want to get caught. Obviously, you have the public, who may or may not like you, and may or may not cooperate with you.
Right.
You have your brass, or your leadership, that some may help, and others are like, we don't like you because of A, B, and C, and so they try to shut you down whenever they can. And that, I think that's why cop shows, I don't know if that's specifically why they're so popular, because there's so many different conflict points that you can create naturally. But any cop show you watch, you're gonna have those three typical conflict points, and those are all very
Yeah.
real, that people know that are out there, and so they like to see how the characters deal with those individually. And I think you bring those in, and it just adds that much more depth to your story. But I mean, anybody, like, Starfleet and Star Trek, you have admirals that are telling Captain Kirk, no, you can't go there, or you can't do this, and then
Right.
he's got to disobey orders to go do his thing, and that's a conflict point. And so in any story, in any context, I think that you can do that very easily. You just have to think about it. It's that
Hmm.
is your first
Well,
thought when you come up
yeah,
with
you
your.
have to. You can't stretch the believability of it too far.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's like you were saying just a minute ago. How tough can you actually make it on your detective character before the reader calls bullshit?
Right, exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And once you hit that point, you're done. You've lost the reader, and they'll probably put the book down and never finish it. But
Yep.
at the same time, if the character were to come to life and not punch you in the face, you're not doing something right either.
Yeah. I think that there does come a point where you're storied out. Like, you cannot do any more, even if you wanted to, like you're saying.
Sure.
There comes a point where you can overload, and you can kind of just diminish everything else that's happening in your story, and then people get bored, right? Like, if you're watching a James Bond, movies are great, but you legitimately know James Bond is probably going to live through the movie. So you're never really
Right.
worried about whether he's going to die or not.
There's a reason there's 25 of them.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's, I think even in episodic television and series, especially long running series, you start to kind of have repetition of what they've done. Like they've already done that, but we're going to do it again. And that was actually one of the big hiccups in when I was writing the third Terra Nova book, is I got about 30-40% in the third Terra Nova book, and I felt like I was repeating stuff that I'd already done in the second book, and it slowed me down. Like it slowed. That book took me twice as long to write the third Terra Nova book as it did to write the first two Terra Nova books, because I was like horrified of doing the same thing,
repeating
over
yourself.
And over again. Lyndon Perry's joined the chat. Hello. Yes, we are live. It is it February 17th? Yes, it is. Yes, we are live.
Yeah, it is. Wow. Ugh.
I can't believe it's already February 17th.
I can't believe it's what day
Nathan Peddle says James Bond is boring. Haven't seen the last three. Like I said, it's hard to watch for a suspenseful movie because you're like, he's gonna come out of it. I usually just watch James Bond for the action scenes.
Exactly. At this point, it's just action movies. And when I watched them when I was a kid with Roger Moore and all that, most of the time it was just for the gadgets and the superhero aspects of it. Because really, in a lot of ways, he's very much an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. kind of guy.
Right.
Shoots lasers and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So it wasn't those movies aren't really about character. They're just about cool factor.
Oh yeah.
Now they've tried to be more serious. But you can't take a character that's been around that long and is that established as this certain thing and just go, oh no, we're gonna make it a serious drama. It's
right.
Hell, that's what Snyder did wrong with the DC movies.
Oh yeah, 100%. And Jay Olivia Oliver says Casino Royale was amazing.
That one was good.
I really did like Casino Royale. It threw me because, like you're saying, they were trying to make it serious and kind of add the drama into this new rendition of James Bond, and it wasn't like it. Like they went from the Pierce Brosnan Michael Bay explosions everywhere, yes, to this one, which was not. It was completely not what they were doing in the previous. Four? How many did Pierce do? 4 or 5?
4, I think.
So it kind of threw me when I originally watched it, and then when I go back and watch it now, in the opening scene, chasing that guy through the construction zone was like the coolest action scene I'd ever seen up to that point. I was like, yes.
And that the fun thing about that is that if you go and read Casino Royale, the Bond that they went to for that movie was much more like the Bond in that book, because the Bond I think it was actually like a novella, but that original Bond was in Casino Royale was much more just the commando type as opposed to the super spy type.
Right.
And I think that's what they were trying to do, and they did a great job with Casino Royale, but they kind of lost it after that. It got a little too, I don't know if touchy-feely is the right word, but it wasn't as much. It was less of an action movie and more of a character study.
It went back to the doing parkour was awesome. It went back to the world domination trope that they have for every James Bond, and I thought that they were going away from that with Casino Royale, but then when they come back and then you get Spectre involved and all this other stuff, and
right,
and it's just one of those other world domination movies. And yeah, Rick says I hated Skyfall. I didn't really like.
Well, yeah, that's specifically the one I'm talking about. It was more about, Bond had such a troubled childhood. Well, I don't give a shit.
Well,
blow something up.
It's weird that they, when Skyfall came out, and of course they do for every James Bond movie, but they're like, this is the best James Bond movie that's ever been made, and this,
that's
and it's
marketing.
I thought that was the worst one of the new ones, but that's just me. And Jay Bardem was really good in the movie, though.
Okay, yeah. Bardem was that guy's never bad. So
let's see. J. Clifton
so what were we
Stager
talking
says
about?
the reverse is true. You may need to cram in too many plot points. I'm in that point with book 2 of a trilogy. Oh, so like you're writing a trilogy, but in book 2 you have too many plot points to wrap. Is that what you're saying? And it won't fit in the trilogy. I agree. Well, Quantum of Solace was bad too. Skyfall and Quantum of Solace were not very good. What was
They're pretty,
Quantum of Solace was the
cool.
one in the desert with the
Yes.
nuclear waste. Yeah, I didn't like that one either. I'm trying to think if there like Casino Royale was good. The spy movies that I really like. Yeah, okay, that's what he's saying. With having too many plot points and being on book 2, how do you wrap it in a trilogy where you have so many plot points? And that's actually kind of where I'm at on the last book of this trilogy. is thinking I have too many plot points now to wrap, and my fear is wrapping them in a way that will not be substantially it won't give the reader that kind of resolution that I'm looking for. It'll just be up, it's done, and I'm trying not to do that. But I was going to say the action movies that I like here recently are the Mission Impossible movies. Even though, say what you want about Tom Cruise,
those have been pretty good.
I think from Rogue Nation on, because kind of Rogue Nation kind of started this new plot line, if you will. The last one, Fallout, was really, really cool. I mean, there's plot holes in it, sure, but the action was really cool. I like that.
Again, action movie.
Yeah, exactly. So, I thought this was a really good conversation. I like talking about. One of my favorite things to do is taking concepts to full story, and I like doing that on a scale that's shortened down. That's why I do outlining first, is because I like coming up with all this stuff beforehand, or trying to, and then not having the pitfalls later. Even though I usually do anyway. But I think before you start writing, or before you sit down and you're like, I have this great idea for a story, and make sure that it's a story and not just a concept. Work it out and see, is this concept viable to use as a story? Can it become something? Can it become a story? It may be a concept that won't become a story, and it's just, maybe that concept is a part of a story, or it's just a beginning of something in your mind that you will come back to later and go, that concept really didn't work the way I envisioned it, but it might work in this other way. And so that's why I would encourage you to do, is take those concepts and really kind of work them out. Is it going to be a good story? Or is it just a kernel of something that will develop into a better story later? And that's what I had for this episode. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope Scott is doing okay. He hasn't messaged me back, so I'm assuming that he's knocked up on NyQuil.
Hopefully he's passed out. Yeah.
But everybody that came and hung out with us tonight, thank you guys for coming and contributing to the conversation. It's I love doing these conversations where everybody is involved, and we had a really good turnout tonight. So thank you everybody for coming and hang out with us. I don't know what we have going on Thursdays, but the Writer's Journey is on Thursdays with Lauren Moore and Kayleen Williams. Make sure you turn in for that 8 Central, 9 Eastern. We also had a new version of storytelling with Joshua Gayu. He did another interview. Gosh, the guy is an English guy, and I can't ever remember his name. But it released today on our YouTube channel. Joshua is doing a lot of long form interviews and just conversations about story. And so he is not doing live shows, and they're kind of sporadic, but they're really good talks. So check that out. It's just released today. And then Walt will be doing a Coffees and Concepts tomorrow morning. And then, Kayleen Williams did another read your story today. She read K.R. McClellan's some of K.R. McClellan's story. It was really good. So check that out on our Facebook page. Our YouTube is www.youtube.com/Keystroke Medium, and the Facebook is just search Facebook for Keystroke Medium. We're the only one there.
Yeah, y'all making me look bad.
Why? What happened?
Well, I mean, Kayleen's doing the story thing and Coffee and Concepts, and, and it's like I'm sitting there going, I show up for this. I need to come up with something.
We all
go ahead.
We all have our part to play. Just like Bill needs to do some more memes. Bill, work it out. Oh, hi, Kevin McLaughlin. Kevin joined us right at the bottom of the show. Welcome, and yeah. So check out all our shows. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do so. And follow us there, and follow us here on Facebook. Join the conversation in our Facebook group, and check out all our shows throughout the week. Thank you very much for hanging out with us. Come back next Monday. We're going to talk about some reading. We're going to talk about some writing, and of course, everything in between right here on Keystroke Medium. See ya.